2025 is almost in the record books. America's Newsroom co-host Bill Hemmer takes a look back at the past 12 months, the top stories that shaped our world.
The year that was 2025, dominated by politics and war, and President Trump making big changes to the federal government. That while conflicts in Israel and Ukraine intensified, those stories and more dominating the headlines over the past 12 months. The year started with a deadly terror attack in New Orleans. In the early hours of New Year's Day, an Islamic terrorist with ties to ISIS drove a truck into a crowd of people, then opened fire before being killed by police. 15 people lost their lives, including the attacker. Just a week later, a series of massive wildfires engulfed much of Southern California, centered near the city of Los Angeles. The fires burned for 24 days, destroying entire towns and neighborhoods. At least 31 were killed, and the economic losses topped $50 billion.
Repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
Donald Trump became just the second president in American history to be sworn into a second non-consecutive term. And he hit the ground running, immediately signing dozens of executive orders aimed at undoing Biden-era policies and implementing his Make America Great Again agenda. Many of those orders and others to come tested the limits of executive authority, with Democrats pushing back through the courts. The Make America Healthy Again movement had a major impact in 2025, eliminating hundreds of harmful ingredients from the food supply, while pushing food manufacturers to take out the dyes and other chemicals. But it also created significant controversy over its targeting of vaccines. HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. claims they're a major cause of autism. Almost immediately, vaccination rates began to decline. And in June, Kennedy fired all 17 members of the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee. The replacements have since voted to overturn several vaccine recommendations, including COVID-19, hepatitis B for babies, and some flu vaccines. In Gaza, a ceasefire was declared in January after President Trump sent his envoy Steve Witkoff to pressure the Israelis. It lasted until March, when Israel began a major new offensive. Another ceasefire was reached in October. That remains in effect as diplomats work on phase 2 of the peace agreements. But it was a different story in Ukraine. The president's push for peace hit significant roadblocks.
We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this.
Including a fiery Oval Office meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
The two presidents argued back and forth on live TV about whether Zelensky showed enough gratitude for America's support. Ultimately, the relationship was repaired, and there's now a new round of talks underway. Gaza wasn't the only Middle East conflict in 2025. Over the summer, Israel and Iran engaged in back-and-forth airstrikes over the Iranian nuclear program. And then, early on a Sunday morning in the month of June, the U.S. hit the 3 main Iranian enrichment sites in a series of devastating blows. It was called Operation Midnight Hammer. The Pentagon says Iran's nuclear program was set back at least 2 years. The world lost a spiritual leader. Pope Francis passed away. He was mourned as a pope of the people who re-engaged Christians around the world and reached out to other faiths along the way. Just 2 weeks later, the conclave to pick his successor began, and after intense speculation, the College of Cardinals elected the first American pope in the history of the Catholic Church. He was from Chicago. Robert Prevost began his papacy in May. He's now known as Pope Leo the 24th. Almost immediately after taking office, President Trump began a mass deportation program. ICE raids became common sights in immigrant communities as hundreds of thousands were sent back to their countries of origin. The deportations initially focused on immigrant criminals, but they've now broadened to include groups like farm workers and those under temporary protected status. Those ICE raids were met with protests, including some that turned violent. In Los Angeles, clashes between demonstrators and law enforcement prompted President Trump to deploy thousands of National Guard members. Their mission was to protect federal property and help ICE deal with violent protesters during immigration raids. That became a standard tactic. In at least 7 cities, ICE crackdowns were accompanied by federal troops. And in Washington, those troops never left. President Trump claims they're needed to secure the nation's capital. A lawsuit challenging their deployment is making its way through the courts. Over the 4th of July weekend, deadly flooding in central Texas. At least 135 Americans losing their lives when the Guadalupe River overflowed. Many of the casualties there were young girls from a Christian summer camp. A shocking tragedy in our nation's capital. 2 West Virginia National Guard members were targeted by an alleged Islamic militant. Guard member Sarah Beckstrom was killed, while Andrew Wolf was seriously injured. Law enforcement says it was a deliberate ambush. The shooter is now in custody. He reportedly worked for the CIA in Afghanistan and came to the U.S. in September of 2021. President Trump immediately halting immigration applications for all Afghan nationals, and asylum claims for most third world countries are now barred.
Now looking ahead to the new year in 2026. We will see if the ceasefire in Gaza holds and how Team USA does in the World Cup here at home. We're also keeping a close eye on the midterm elections to see whether or not the Republicans can hold the majority. And of course, we will be here for all of it. In New York, Bill Hemmer, Fox News.